Okay. So where were your parents and grandparents born?
My grandparents were born on my mother's side were born in Germany, in Wetter an der Ruhr or close by Wetter an der Ruhr, and my mother was born in Wetter an der Ruhr, Germany. And my father's parents were born in Poland. I think at that time it was Tsarist Russia, though. And my father was born in Poland, Szeno, I think it was called. And it was at that time also Tsarist Russia.
Let's talk about your grandparents for a minute. Did either one of your grandparents have either a positive or a negative influence on you in any way?
I don't really know if they.
I think one time you mentioned your grandmother had a negative influence in some way.
Oh, my grandmother. Well, I don't think she loved us that much. And she always thought that my mother spoils us. So she was kind of very.
This is the one that you didn't invite to the wedding, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
So what kind of a person was she exactly?
She seemed to be kind of a little bit strict or harsh or short kind of.
What was her name?
Selma.
Selma.
Clara Selma.
Oh, you got named after her.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, brother.
Clara, I definitely know Clara was her name.
Uh-huh.
Though I never heard anybody called Clara. Always was called Oma or Mama.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather we loved. He was so very likable, very generous, and very lovable.
What was his name?
Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Carl was his name.
Did they have a happy marriage?
Yes, they had a very happy marriage.
An odd couple, but they got along.
An odd couple, but the two of them, they just loved each other, and they had really a very, very good marriage. What I could see, that their devotion to each other and respect for each other, they had a very good marriage.
Now, how about your parents meeting and falling in love? How much do you know about that?
My parents...
Opa and Hertha Teichmann.
Well, Opa, I don't know if I should start first how Opa got to Wetter, because he was, as I said, he was born in Poland, and he came from a very Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox family, and in a way his parents wanted him to become a rabbi, but Opa wasn't very Orthodox. He was of the newer generation who was more on the Zionist idea, on the advanced thinking away from the Orthodox religion, Jewish religion. And he decided to go to Germany because one of his relatives, an uncle or something like that, was in Germany at the time. He decided he's going to Germany too. And somehow his mother helped him a little bit, gave him a little money or something, and he went to Germany. And he was only 17 at the time. And somehow he came to Wetter an der Ruhr. The whole story about him is a complete story in itself, how and what he did there and so on. And he found a room when he moved to Wetter down the street from where Oma lived. They had a bakery. My grandfather had a bakery there. And how they really met the first time is Opa, my father walked by, up the street, and my mother was outside and up on a ladder, cleaning the windows or something. And he was walking by, and she all of a sudden see that the man is walking by, and she was thinking, oh goodness, I hope he couldn't look up into my skirt, and see my underpants. But anyhow, that was the first meeting, so somehow they looked at each other, and she was kind of embarrassed.
But they must have had a conversation, obviously.
No,
and-
I think he just walked by.
Is that right?
Because they
So when
didn't.
did-
That
when-
was the first time they saw each other. She didn't know who he was. She just knew he's a stranger in town.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a small town, almost everybody knows each other there.
Mhm.
And but then afterwards they were introduced. Somebody introduced them,
Oh, I see.
and
Things went from there.
things went from there. Right.
Hmm. How much did Oma tell you about her childhood?
Well, what she told us about her childhood.
I mean, did she have like a typical German childhood? Because she was German, she wasn't Jewish, and so what?
Well, there was a World War I when she was 9, 10. It was
I see.
4 years, World War, 4 years. So when
Uh-huh.
she was 9 or 10, when she was 10, the first World War broke out, and she said at the time when she grew up, it was just terrible. They were almost starving. That's how difficult it was to get food, and they had to scrounge, and even with firewood or coal they couldn't get. So it was a very difficult time because my grandfather was a soldier at the time, and there wasn't really that much help that they gave to people.
So she
that
probably
time.
learned a lot of her hustling abilities
Right.
at that time.
At that time, because we
Sure.
already, when she was that age, all the kids were sent out to hustle for something.
Sure. Yeah. So what else do you know about what she did before she married Oppa?
Oh, she learned, she went into, they call it the Lehre, to learn how to make hats, because everybody wore fancy, beautiful hats at the time, so that was her, you say profession, or
Yeah, I guess so.
that was, yeah. And she was excellent at it. She designed the hats and made them.
Wow. Clothing
A
design.
lot of her own, well, millinery?
Yeah, millinery, something
millinery,
like that.
that's what it's called, yes. And she was very good
Hmm.
at it.
Does that have anything to do with her having a lot of hat boxes in Coolidge Street in the closet or
Well,
something? or-
she used to make a lot of her own hats.
Uh-huh. Hmm. Did she ever talk about any stories about the courtship between the two of them? Other than knowing how they met? Were there any?
Well,
I mean, were they like really compatible? I know, the marriage at the end wasn't
I
that
don't
great, but-
think so. They were from two different.
How did her family react to her marrying a Jewish man?
Oh, at first they were they liked it, they were happy with him because he was, I think when he came there, he lived already a few years in Germany. Maybe he was 19 at the time. Yeah, I think he was already maybe 21, because he's 4 years older than my mom.
Yeah.
And he was well dressed, and he started a business there. So
he was doing pretty well.
So he was already, and they approved of him. And then people started influencing them. Oh, how could you? He's Jewish and this and that. And I think they got a little bit influenced, because when my mother really wanted to get married, they were against it.
The family was against it by that time.
They thought it's better for her not to marry, a Jewish person, because if she has children or this and that, it's everything. All of
So
a
she
sudden they
actually
decided
did
no.
what she wanted to do and kind of went
And then
against
she
their
decided,
wishes.
first you said yes, now you said no, no such thing. I'm going to marry
Yeah,
her.
because she was a pretty strong-willed lady
Yes.
from what I remember.
That's right. But nobody came to the wedding.
You're kidding.
Yeah, that's what I understand, that they didn't come to the wedding. Her
Nobody
parents.
from her. And his
I don't know
parents
who
were
else, if
off-
her sister and some other people. They didn't have a big wedding. It
Right.
was just because
Oh,
there
that's
were no
interesting.
Jewish people there, and
Yeah.
she went over to the Jewish religion. She became
Uh-huh.
Jewish. She took lessons. She
So none of
went
her
to
family
mikveh
showed up?
and all that thing. Well, she
Wow.
didn't really have.
Well, she wasn't going to invite him after they made a big deal and said, don't marry this guy.
Well, they just didn't.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I wish I would have asked her really more about this whole story, how it happened. But anyhow, she got married.
Is there any special story about Oma, or something that she did, or about the way she was that stands out in your mind?
Well, Oma was very, how do you say, righteous and just, you know.
Mm-hmm.
In all the things he did, in every way, and very helpful, very compassionate for other people. That I think stands out most of all, and that's I think what she also taught us. What you don't want done to yourself, don't do unto other people. That was kind of her
Golden rule.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any time that she got really mad at you and how it ended up?
Oh, that was much later. I was already
Mm-hmm.
married, and I was.
Wasn't there some incident about spanking Elsie and?
Oh yes, a child. Yes. Well, I don't know if she really was that angry at me. It's just that she wanted to teach me I shouldn't do that. It wasn't really that she was angry. It was because I never.
What was the
never got
incident?
spanked.
What was happening
I never got
exactly?
spanked before, you know.
How old were you and what exactly happened?
I think I was about 4 years. Elsie was naughty.
Elsie's how many years older than you?
3.5, I think.
So she was 7, yeah.
Yeah, she was 7. She was naughty. She didn't. Somehow she insulted someone at the table. We had dinner and somebody was there, and Oma said to the person, "Why don't you try this? See if if you like it." We opened a can, you know, all the homemade cans that Oma.
Mm-hmm.
And Elsie said, "Why can't I try it? I want to try it. She's only here, you know. She doesn't belong to the family." Something on that idea. And Oma got very upset that this is rude, this is not polite, and she gave her a slap on her back.
Right on the table, right at the table.
Well, right there somehow, and all of a sudden Elsie's nose started bleeding. At that time it seemed she had nosebleed once in a while. And when I saw blood, I just went crazy. When I saw blood, I thought, this is, you know, the worst thing that could happen.
And so what did you do then?
And she kind of sat down on the floor and put her head down so it really was dripping, you know, like
great.
crazy. And I looked at that. And I was so upset that I ran to my mother, you know, got off the table from the chair, and I ran to my mother and I lifted my hand and I was going to hit her.
Little 4-year-old kid was going to take on her mother.
Was going to take on her
Wow.
mother. And my mother just grabbed me and turned me around and gave me a few on my behind, you know. You shouldn't lift your hand to your mother. And that was it, the only time that I ever got spanked.
Wow.
By her. So that's the incident, what I remember. But I don't think she really was angry at
She
me.
just was going to show you who's boss.
She just was going to show me that you don't go around hitting your mother.
Right.
If you think she's wrong.
Mm-hmm. I think you and I had an incident like that.
Yes.
Calling you a mule or something.
Yes.
What disappointments do you think that Oma suffered in her life? And how did she cope with it?
Disappointments?
I think you mentioned like her marriage might have been one of her major disappointments.
Well, I think eventually her marriage also wasn't what she dreamt. Well, but then also they lived in Germany. They had a good life. They were well-to-do, and then they had to leave everything behind and go to Poland. I would say that is a very upsetting and very big disappointment. All of a sudden you get someplace, a place you don't know anybody there,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have anything, all your comforts that you had, all of a sudden it's gone.
Tell the story about when the Nazis came and knocked on the door and how fast you had to leave and that whole thing.
Oh my goodness. That was the fall of 1938, and Papa just had come home from his business trip, and we were just sitting down to dinner, and all of a sudden the doorbell rang, and I don't know if Mama opened up or who opened up, but 2 policemen came in and said, "Mr. Teichmann, we are sorry to disturb you, but we have to tell you, we have to give you the order that you have to be over the German border by 12 o'clock tonight. We just were all stunned. No, I think there must have been just a complete silence in the room for a while. You just couldn't comprehend something like that.
Total shock.
Total shock. He had lived there for, I think it was now 20 years in Germany. And then they left. And then all of a sudden a big commotion. Mama, what are we going to do? And Papa and the kids, we started crying. What do you mean we have to leave? Where do we go? And, you know, and it was supposed to be to Poland, over the border. You know, we have to be over the border because they said my father is still Polish because that's where he was born. And so we got up, everybody got up from the table. My mother said, what are we going to take? How are we going to do? I mean, it was just crazy. It was just absolutely crazy. Chaos. And within another 15 minutes, the doorbell rang again, and they came in again, and they said, I'm sorry, Mr. Teichmann, Mrs. Teichmann, our orders have been changed. We have to take you with us right away, Mr. Teichmann.
That must have freaked you out a little bit too.
And your wife will come and meet you at this and this railroad station tomorrow at 12 o'clock. And somehow, okay, and there took Papa right away. Whatever he was, he grabbed his coat, and that's it, and he left.
Wow.
They took him. Now he couldn't even help, he couldn't even decide, he couldn't, that's it. Now Mama was all on her own. What is she going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And at that time we had a young girl lived with us, a Jewish girl, and she was also a Polish Jewish, her background, her parents. And she was saying, you know, she was also crying, oh God, goodness, what is happening to my parents? Somehow I don't know if they had a telephone. You couldn't call the way, not everybody had a phone the way you have today.
Mm-hmm.
And she was crying and praying in a way, you know, that nothing should happen, that everything, you know.
Yeah.
I think that kind of
shook you up?
Shook me up that the praying didn't help, you know.
Yeah, right.
And then Mama tried to pack whatever she could think of during the evening, and eventually somehow she got us to go to bed. And somehow she knew that it is very cold in Poland, quite different than in that part of Germany, that there are cold winters, freezing and snow and so on. Why we almost never had freezing weather there, or snow, very seldom. And the next morning, since usually you don't have any cash in the house, usually there's not much cash in the house, the cash is or in the bank, or the cash is people owe you when you have a business.
Sure.
So the next morning she went to a few of the businesses that were close by, not too long of a distance, and tried to collect some money, some outstanding money, so we would at least have some money today, and went to the bank, whatever was available there. Also, she quickly bought us a few winter clothes, a winter coat, and a few things. And then at 12 o'clock we got to the railroad, and I think she also took the bedcloth and had that packed, and we took that so that we had puffs and pillows and so on with us, and some food with us on the train, because now we didn't know, do they pack us on the train and we can't get off anywhere, and that's it. And on the train station it was chaos. It was just, what do you call it?
A zoo.
There's another word for it, you know. I mean, everybody
Pandemonium.
was... Pandemonium, exactly. People came, or wives came to the land, tried to search or look for their husband. Where's the husband now? You know, everybody was trying to meet their family there, their husband there, and are running and are yelling and are screaming, and it's hard to imagine. And eventually we found our father there, and we all got on the train. I don't remember too much of the train ride. I probably was too tired. And but I remember when we got to the border and we had to get off, and that railroad station, it must have been already the Polish border. The train got over the border somehow, or in between the border or something. And it was so packed. It was so packed. The waiting rooms in there wasn't almost an inch you could find where to sit. Mm-hmm. The floors all over, never mind chairs, the floors everywhere were people. Because all the Polish citizens, of which we're told that they're now Polish citizens, because that's where they were born, from all over Germany, were sent to that border station.
Wow.
So everybody was there. And it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Where was the time or the place when you were like really upset and saying, oh, they're going to kill us, and you were kind of like...
Well, I think I got almost like a nervous breakdown at that time.
Was that at the station or before when the Germans had come in, or where was that?
Well, it came really out afterwards. At that station, when we got there into that place, and you almost couldn't breathe, and all these people. I've never been used to having that many.
And you were exactly how old?
People. I was 9 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you could feel that terrible, how the parents are anxious, how everybody is anxious, what is happening, what is going on, this whole
danger in
terrified danger that's in there. And also already before, when we were still in Germany, they were talking about what is going to happen, what is Hitler going to do. And every store and every restaurant, you had the signs, Juden unerwünscht. That means Jews not welcome, or Jews not permitted, Jews cannot come here, Jews not allowed. Swimming pools, the public swimming pools, all restaurants, all stores, Jews not allowed. So all of a sudden we realized we are something different, which we didn't know until that time. And then you heard people talking, and friends talking, and Papa talking, we should leave if we can't stay here, who knows what's going to happen. So this all, was working on me without really, at that time, realizing. But when we had to leave, and when this train ride, and at the train station, and then arriving there was the people and the packed and the crying and children crying. I'm thirsty and no water. You didn't have that much water. You didn't have food there for all these people. All of a sudden, it seemed like I had a nervous breakdown. So there, some people from the surrounding area who lived there, Jewish people, came and tried to help or do something. And I remember there was one man there, and he picked me up and kind of tried to calm me, make me feel
What were you
more
saying
comfortable. Somehow, all of a sudden, my legs were numb, and I was hollering, I'm getting numb legs, I can't move, and all these, crazy things.
Yeah. Weren't you saying they were going to kill us and this and that? And
that
stuff
was
like
a little bit afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Kill me.
Oh.
And then somehow my father knew he had to get us out of there.
Yeah.
And there weren't any trains, or they weren't giving us any trains. The Poles didn't want all the Jews to come across the border. Now they didn't have anything with them. They didn't bring riches. They were sent out without anything. And you couldn't go back to Germany, so it was really terrible. And my father started to ask and talk, and eventually he found someone who said, yes, he's going to get a train that will take people to Posen, it was, which was already definitely on the Polish side. And he said, I give you all the money, whatever I have with me. Just get us the train so we can get out of here. So the man somehow got the train on the railroad tracks, and we got onto the train, and we got to Posen. And there already people knew what was going on. They prepared, the Jewish communities prepared for people who came there. They were helping out, trying to find places to sleep and food to eat and so on. So in the community center, when we got there, they took us to the Jewish community center. Now there were all kinds of people who were trying to take the people home to sleep. But they didn't have necessarily enough room for a whole family. So some people just took the men. Some people said, okay, the children and the mothers can come. So one woman said she's going to take us. And I must not have liked this woman or something. All of a sudden I start screaming, she has a gun. She has... So crazy.
You really freaked out at
yes.
this point. You just... Yeah.
She wants to kill me.
Yeah, sure.
So, okay, eventually they said, okay, I can't go with her. Mama can't go with her. So they found somebody else.
Yeah.
So we went with somebody else. Papa went someplace else, and they took us someplace else. I don't even know who or where, but they found us a bed, so we all slept in that in that one bed. And the next morning, Papa came there, picked us up, and another family invited us over to have breakfast with them. And they were very, very nice people, so helpful and so nice. And they said they're going to make arrangements so we could get to Ostrovets, where my father's parents lived. Mm-hmm. So they got us on the train, and we were on our way to go to Ostrovets, where my grandparents lived. In the meantime, my grandparents had lost all their business, their fortune, already after the Second World War. When the Cossacks came in, somehow they ruined everything. They took everything. They shot one of my father's sister, got killed also by the Cossacks. And so my grandparents at this time were really poor. They didn't have anything. They were well-to-do when my father was growing up, but at that time things came and things went. You got riches and then you lost them. And so we got, I don't know how long we were traveling. We got to Ostrovets, and it was fall, and it was the gloomiest season. And it was dusk. It was kind of not really raining, but as if it is going to rain or thunder, or as if the world goes
pretty gloomy.
Is ready to disappear. And my cousin was at the station waiting for us. My cousin was at that time 23, so he was 13 years older than I. And there were no automobiles at the time in that part of Poland. And he came with, like you say, a taxi, which was horse and carriage.
A buggy.
Buggy, right. And all our, whatever we had with us, and the 3 kids and 3 grown-ups were all on this little buggy, which really only is supposed to carry 4 people. And he was standing on the side. There's like a step that you walk into the carriage. And since I was already so hysterical at that time and almost had a breakdown, or maybe I did have a breakdown, I don't know. And he was standing on that carriage, and I've never driven anything like that. And it was leaning all the way to the side, because he was standing there and it must have been much heavier. And I was yelling again and screaming, it's going to tip over, it's going to tip over. And he assured me, and everybody assured me, no, it's not going to tip, it's all right, but it's just I didn't want to listen to it. And since that time, I disliked my cousin terribly, because he
wouldn't listen to you.
He wouldn't listen to me.
That's interesting.
And we got to the house. My grandmother and my grandfather was there, and they were strange people, Naturally, I'd never met them before, and Haven't heard too much about them.
In what way did they strike you as strange?
Well, they were very, very religious, and that
Oh,
part
the
of
Orthodox Jewish. Yeah.
Orthodox Jewish, and that part of Poland, Ostrowiec, I think, was the dirtiest town in all of Poland, or city. Maybe Ostrowiec was a city, the dirtiest. And when we came to that place, I was even more in shock. I was even more in shock. Walking into that room or place, whatever it was called. There was no light. There was no water, running water. There were no toilets inside the house. No water, no running water. And everything just hit me. Everything just hit me that it was terrible. And also we didn't speak the language. They spoke Jewish, which is a few words maybe are similar to German. And we spoke German. We couldn't communicate, talk to each other. I wonder how terrible it must have been for my mother to get there, you know. I mean, here I'm a child, and children, you say usually maybe they're not quite that affected. Well, some children are,
pretty
some
affected
not.
at the
I
time.
was terribly affected by it. Terrible. It was just terrible. And, well, slowly we somehow got adjusted there. Eventually, well, they took me to doctors and had me, you know, checked out what physically there was really nothing wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And they assured me, you are right, you know, there's nothing wrong. And all of a sudden I said, I can't breathe, you know. And there was really nothing wrong with me. It was all the
Scared
nerves.
half to death.
Yes, right. And eventually I got over it, found new friends, you know, people tried to be friendly and nice, and Papa's friends that he used to have at that time, you know, they were also his age, they came and tried to be helpful, and they liked. A lot of them kind of took me under their wings, so I was more in their house than I was at home. And so, as a matter of fact, after a little while, I got to like it. I got to like it there. I got to like the people. I got to like the friends. I got to like the friendliness of the people. You know, the way they try to take care of me. And maybe I think we should start on something else.
Okay.
And then we will go back to this phase of my life.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Oppa's personality, because he was pretty easygoing, but then at other times I think he had a bit of a temper, I guess.
Yes, he was a very likable person. Everybody liked him. And always smiling, always pleasant. And, well, he also was very compassionate, very concerned about other people. And the one big fault he had a bad temper, which once in a while he lost, you know, complete control. And this was so hard to take, because when you looked at that person, you wouldn't believe it, that he could get that mad, you know, could lose his temper. So it's very, very hard to take. You know, when you have a mean person, it's easy. You think you're always afraid of that person. But with him, he's always so friendly, twinkling eyes, you know, and always candies in his pocket and chocolate in his pocket, and giving it and sharing with the dog, you know, with everybody. So it was really too bad that he had such a bad temper and didn't know how to control it. So, well, he was, as I said, very compassionate, because afterwards, when he was in camp, he many times risked his life in order to save Sami, because he was they call it Vorarbeiter, you know. So he was in charge of these workers, and a lot of times he spoke up to the also he could speak German with the Germans, and some of them would listen to him, and he could influence them to have it.
Yeah, I remember reading his
straighten-
manuscript.
you know,
He really
have
stuck
things
his neck out a
straightened
lot.
out. So he did
Yeah.
that a lot of times, you
Yeah.
know. So, what else?
When you were a kid, were there any severe illnesses in the family that affected you and the family in any way?
Yeah, I would think. When I was about 2.5, or maybe close to 3, Oma got very sick, and they took her to the hospital, and I think she was there maybe 6 weeks or so. So I missed her very much. And they took us to the hospital ground, and I only could see her when she came out on the balcony, because supposedly they said she had contacted typhoid, and so nobody could go in. And I was standing out there and crying, "Mama, mama, mama," and she couldn't come down to me, and I couldn't go up to her, you know. So that is one experience which I think probably affected me somehow. And then later on, I was already 6, I think, at the time, or 5.5. Opa got sick and was in the hospital, appendicitis. And at that time, operations, they weren't so good, and something went wrong, so he had to stay in for many, many weeks. And we went to visit him in the hospital. So the hospital was quite different than the hospitals are today. He had his own room, his own nurse there, and food whenever he wanted it. So I sometimes spent half days there at the hospital. And I ate there, and I played in the room where he was. And I had a great time in the hospital. Once I was there, and I did something stupid. I mean, I was playing, and they had chairs. Oh, you call them ice cream parlor chairs that have these round holes in there. And I was playing, looking out the window or something. So I put my head through the middle of the chair.
Don't tell me it got
through,
stuck.
and I couldn't get it out again. It got stuck. And I started screaming, and Papa was in bed, and he couldn't get out.
Oh,
you know?
jeez.
And I was stuck in the chair. Well, he rang the bell, and not too long, you know, somebody came and they tried to get me out. But still, you know, once you're in there, it's not as easy to get out. So they had to calm me down, you know, okay, you got in, so we get you out. So they got me out eventually, you know, so that was kind of an experience. Then I had another experience in the hospital, because he was in and then out again of the hospital, and then in again, because it somehow didn't heal. And this was that I went to the bathroom. There were no bathrooms directly in the room. You had to go out in the hallway, and there was a bathroom there, and you locked it with a, what do you call it? You slide it so that it doesn't open. And I went in, I was just tiny, and I slid the bathroom closed, and then I couldn't get it open. And I couldn't get out. And there was no bell to ring or to call someone. And it happened to be on a Sunday, I think. And
Why does this sound like a situation comedy from TV or something?
Yes. And I was going crazy. I didn't want to scream. I was almost ashamed that I locked myself in there.
How old were you at this time?
That? I think I was about 6.5. And then I said, well, I crawl up. The window was about this high, you know, there was a window. So I crawled up on the window, and I was sitting on the windowsill. But I didn't want to tell people that came in visiting their relatives, or, you know, somebody in the hospital. I didn't want to tell them. I was ashamed to tell them, I'm locked in here, get me out of here. So I was just sitting there, you know, and not daring to tell anybody, you know. that I am locked in the
How did you
bathroom. How
eventually
will I
get
in
out
the
of this bathroom?
Well, eventually I must have told someone or somehow knocked on the door. Somebody maybe tried to come in, wanted to get in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then they told me, now, just calm down and try slowly to push it open. We pushed the door. Maybe it was somehow a little bit jammed, you know. They had to do a certain thing, you know. And I was just tiny and I had to reach up there.
Yeah.
So anyhow, eventually I got it open and I got out of there. That was the second adventure. That was so crazy.
This
I
is
was
a separate
chicken.
chapter in your life,
I
hospital
was
adventures.
chicken already. You see, at that time I was chicken. I didn't holler and say, "Get me out of here!" But I just sat there at the window, crying, maybe little tears running down. Nobody paid attention to me, you know.
Any other hospital adventures?
No, those two were the big. And the food in there was just delicious, absolutely delicious. I think that's why I stayed there all the time. I was terrible when it came to eating. I didn't like anything, but take me to a restaurant, take me to a hospital, and the food was delicious.
Now, how about you as a kid? Let's talk about your
Oh, I
childhood.
was very good. See, I never got spanked. That's why it was when I went to hit my mother, you know, I didn't even hit her, I just raised my hand.
Yeah.
And I got spanked from her. That was the first time and the only time I ever remember that I got spanked.
Mm-hmm. What's the
Or
earliest thing that you remember? What's the first thing you remember? First memories?
The first memories?
Did you say it was something about visiting an aunt somewhere or something?
Yeah, but I think this hospital, when I went to see my mother, that's something of the first thing in mind, because I must have been very little.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I just started to walk at the time, you know, maybe like 2 years or so, around that age. So this probably wouldn't be the first, but something that really stands out in my mind, that was a beautiful experience when I went visiting my aunt, that was the youngest sister of my mother. And it was so beautiful there where she lived. Kind of a small town, or like out in the country almost. And the house was pretty, and the apartment was pretty, and there was a nice big yard around it. And I think it was a two-family. The owners lived downstairs, and they had 2 children, but they were already teenagers, maybe 17 and 20 and so on. And they liked me too. And then there was another little girl next door that was younger than I, so she was still in a baby carriage. So I somehow really had fun. I was the only one there, you know, so everybody paid attention to me, my aunt, everybody. So it was just a beautiful experience.
Hmm. Do you remember any of the stories they told about you as a baby?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, one story which I heard quite often.
And what is that story?
Well, I must have just started to talk, maybe, when did the kids start to talk? 18 months, 2 years or so. And it was also 2 or 3 family where Oma and Opa lived at first. And the owner's son asked me, what is your name? And since I just learned, they taught me what my name is and so on, I said, Kakataiman. Which means Clara Teichmann. And I said, Kakataiman. And he just must have liked the sound, the way it sounded, you know. So he asked me again, I didn't hear you. Tell me again, what is your name? And I said, Kakataiman. And then he kept saying, oh, I didn't understand you, I didn't hear you. What is your name again? And I said, Kakataiman hai. And he kept asking me again, and I said, Kakataiman hai, and always emphasizing more. How come you don't understand me? You know, how come you don't know, you don't hear? And then the last time when he asked me again, I really didn't understand you. Tell me again what your name is. And I would say, Kakataiman hai do, why you don't know? And which means, Kakataiman hai heiß ich doch. Weißt du das denn nicht?
Is your name, don't you know that?
Don't you know that after all
This
this
guy
time?
was driving you crazy.
And I fell for it every time. I
Is that-
fell for it every time.
So he did this
That's
on more
why-
than one occasion.
That's why they kept telling me
got a real
that I
kick out
fell
of this.
for it every time, because he just got a kick out of it. Every time I ended up, weißt du das denn nicht? You know. Don't you know that? That's my name.
How about childhood playmates? Any memorable events?
No.
Boys having a crush on you?
Oh, I always had a crush on somebody.
Didn't some boy want to marry you even though you were Jewish or something?
Yeah, that was when I was in school already. But in kindergarten, I always had a crush on somebody. It might have lasted 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but there always was somebody I had a crush on. That didn't mean necessarily they had a crush on me too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I had a crush on them. And in school, yeah, that was just shortly before we were sent away. This boy was my age, and the two of us were the best in the class. And we played together sometimes. And then one day he told me that he definitely is going to marry me when he grows up. And he doesn't care that I'm Jewish or not. He definitely is going to marry me. So
He had his mind made up.
He had his mind made up. I didn't say yes or no. I thought it's probably still a long way off.
How about
And since I think since I always had a crush on someone, I knew my mind changes very often, so I didn't want to get stuck and say, yes, I'll marry
How about
you
crushes
too.
on teachers?
Teachers? No.
Mm-hmm.
No, not at that time, no.
How about dreams as a kid? Any dreams that really...
Goodness. Dreams, if you start about dreams, I had nightmares.
How old were you?
I think it started when I was about close to 6, I would say. Close to 6. It was during a time that all of a sudden a few people that were close or not so close, or people I knew, died. And shortly after, at the time when they died, I wasn't quite aware what it means. It might have been I was 5 years and it didn't enter my mind yet, my consciousness. What does it mean, dying? But afterwards, a little bit afterwards, when I got to be 6.5 or so, maybe 6, I became aware of what it really means. So my uncle had died, or great uncle, that we had spent the vacation with the year before. My brother and I, we went there all summer. We were there on vacation. My aunt and her daughter lived there, and we had a fantastic time. We enjoyed it. And then he died, and somehow they were talking about it, how he died, that he had a heart attack, and how it was. He couldn't breathe all of a sudden, and all this kind of stuff. You know. At that time, I wasn't instantly afraid, but it stuck in my mind to work, you know. And then a sister of my aunt's brother-in-law died, and they were talking about her, and she was very young. She had lung infection, what do you call it?
Tuberculosis?
No, not tuberculosis, lung virus, what do you call it? Pneumonia. She died of pneumonia. So they were talking about that and how upset everybody was that she died so young, and you know, so that kind of stuck in my mind. And then when I went to first grade, a little girl died. I didn't even know her, but I saw everybody was talking about it, and I saw the funeral procession as they walked by, and she had fallen into a boiling tub of water, because women do their laundry, you know, in the wash tub, and they poured boiling water, and somehow the child fell in.
Wow.
And everybody was talking about that, so that's another incident. And then the third one, and that's already, after that I started dreaming terrible dreams. Nightmares about death, about seeing caskets with dead people in it. Oh, and then also one of our, how do you say, we had a girl helping out. She stayed with us, she slept with us, a maid, you call it. And she lived not too far away from us, and she said if she wanted to take us, somebody died in the house and she wanted to take us there. They always had people inside the house, like a wake, similar to that. 3 days they had them in one of the rooms. And she took us there to show us the dead man who died.
And you were how old?
I was around 6, 6.5. That was all around that age.
Yeah.
And that stuck all of a sudden in your mind, you know. Person looks as if he's alive, but doesn't move. Is
So
dead,
you actually
you know.
looked at him?
Oh yeah, she took us into that room. It's kind of darkened room, everything black walls. They put black fabric all around the room, and then there's the casket. So that was another experience around that time, and I started having terrible nightmares.
Is there any dream that stands out in particular, or that you could tell in
There
kind
were
of detail?
a few dreams. One in particular stands out, and it was for ages haunting me and scaring me. I was going for a walk, or I was on my way home, and you know, at that time in Germany you had all these little yards with little fences, a yard here and a fence, and you had little walks where you could walk by or through, like little path between the gardens. And now I came to a path, and I could go either this way or that way. And I decided, well, I take this path. And as I walked down the path, all of a sudden there was a casket on the side of the road. And somebody made me look at that casket, and there was a young woman in the casket, naturally dead. And that fear, that nightmare was with me. I don't know how long. And then eventually I woke up. But this terrible feeling, you know, of why did I go this way? If I would have taken that road, I wouldn't have seen this, you know? Why did I take this path? I could have taken that path, you know. But it was only a dream.
But how do you know there weren't two caskets down the other path?
I don't know anything. It's just...
That's quite a dream.
It was terrible. And then I had another dream. And I think that's why I still don't like wax figures, and I don't go to wax museums. From our house, from our balcony where we lived at the time, when we looked across, there was a field, and also the fields weren't fields, but people had their little gardens, things planned, vegetable gardens, and so on. We could see far across the field. There was an apartment house, and all these apartments had like balconies. And I looked out my balcony, and on one of the balconies I see a figure standing, almost like a mannequin. And that in itself, when you tell somebody that, that's not scary. You see somebody standing there, but it had this strange feeling, this person, it was a girl, and I think now it must have been connected with the sister that died of Oma's brother-in-law, who was still a young girl, maybe in her early 20s. And I saw her standing on that balcony and staring eyes looking at me. Just staring, you know, looking at me. And it was so far away, I couldn't really see eyes. If you really stand on the balcony, you couldn't see anything there. But I could see that terrible staring face looking at me and scaring me to death, just like the person in the casket. But this person was standing. And since then, I won't look at the wax. I still won't look at the wax. I can get a little shock when I look at the wax mannequin, like when you go to the wax museums or something like that. It still gives me a strange feeling.
Wow.
That was the other dream. And I woke up screaming at night. Well, those were the two worst dreams I had. I had.
How about some good dreams? Do you have any
Those
good
I
dreams?
don't remember. Then I had all kinds of other dreams that were kind of nightmares, but the contents of it isn't really a nightmare, but it gave me a nightmarish feeling. And I have no idea why. Well, I mean, probably because I was all upset at that time about dying, that a person can die. And then another incident, we had at that time, the maid that took me to the wake there, left, and we had another maid. And she was Catholic, and at one time she was telling us a story that when we die, that is because God up in heaven picks a little beautiful flower that he wants, and that's a person who goes and is with God. Because he picks that flower, and then we're not there, but we're there. And I was terrified. I don't want to be a beautiful flower and be fixed and not be home with my parents, but up there someplace, you know? So there was another fear. Anytime I can be picked and I won't be with my parents, I won't be here anymore, be someplace else, that's, you know. So that was all somehow around that time, you know, that stayed in my mind, and it contributed to my nightmares and fear, and maybe later on also the kind of nervous breakdown that I had, you know. So these are not such...
The fear phases.
The fear phase. Until that time, I was a very happy little girl. Until this consciousness really, I became aware of this. I was a happy-go-lucky, except when I saw blood, you know. Otherwise, I was happy-go-lucky and had a very pleasant childhood. Everybody liked me. I tried to run after my sister, who didn't want me, you know. Otherwise, it was very, very...
How about getting along with your brother and sister?
Oh, I got along with my brother. He was very close in age. We always played together. I was like his little mother, watching out what he shouldn't do, because he always had mischief. The things which, you know...
Like, what kind of stuff did he get into?
He shouldn't... Well, not really bad, but things that he might get hurt, or he might...
Wasn't there some glass incident?
Yeah, like he took a bottle, I think it was a little soda bottle or something, and we were playing out on the grass, and he decided to throw the bottle in the air. Somehow I knew what goes up must come down. And I said, don't do that. Don't throw the bottle, and it can come down, you know, on your head. But he kept doing it, and it came down on his head. And his head started bleeding. And I saw the blood, and I went running and screaming like crazy. And everybody came running out. What happened to you? What happened to you? And nothing happened to me. It was to him. And he wasn't crying. I was the one who was screaming. And so that's the kind of the things he did, you know, that isn't really mischief or anything bad. It's just things which I reasoned weren't too good to do. And the other incident is when we were on vacation with this uncle who died, but it was the year before. And it was really out in the country, and they had the dumps where people threw things. And there were also some bottles there, and wine bottles and other bottles, and we were roaming around all over the place, and we had a fantastic time. Climbing trees and going into the woods and scaring ourselves, you know, saying, oh, there's a man down there, you know. And we started running home, you know, and all kinds of things like that. And at this dump, we also found other friends there during the summer to play with. The boys, as a matter of fact, they were all boys. I was the only girl with them. Decided they're going to take the bottles and hit them together. And I said to them, don't do that. That's the bottles, that's glass, and it might hit somebody, you know. And I went far away and stood on the side, far away, And they just banged the bottle together. Eventually, bang, one hit my foot. And I had a big, big hole in here, in my foot. And this time, I started crying and screaming. It was me really who was hurting. Somehow it hit the bone here, and the pain was very painful. And we all went home. Naturally, Gerhard got punished this time, you know.
Seems like bottles were a major attraction.
Yeah, you know, anything that's different, anything that's a little different. But you didn't go to, I really needed stitches there, but at that time you just didn't go to the hospital. You just put a Band-Aid on and that's it. And it took ages to heal. Didn't want to heal because every time I climbed on a chair, somehow I had to climb with my knee to get up and sit on a chair. And every time I seemed to be to bang this spot again. So I have a big scar here, this scar right here. So that was the other.
How about getting along with your sister? Did you ever play with your sister, or did she just like get lost, or 'cause she was older?
Yeah, we played sometimes too together, but more with my brother because she didn't want me around. I wanted to go everywhere with her, to her friends and do everything, you know. And she was the older sister. She just didn't want me around to, you know, tag along. And I got upset, and sometimes my mother said, "You take her with you." And, that wasn't the right thing, you know? And she had to take me with her sometimes,
Well,
and I was 10 feet behind her, you know. So now she wasn't thrilled about that. And I was thrilled when she had to take me. I remember at one time, she was already in school. I think it was first grade, and and they showed a movie, and that was something very unusual. You didn't have movies. You didn't. I think you just had cinema at that time for a few years because this was around 34, and they were going to show or slides or some kind of a movie there, and I wanted to go with her, and she didn't want to take me. And my mother said, "You take her with you." So she had to take me with her, and I had to stay 10 feet behind. You know? But I got to see whatever they showed there, you know, this kind of movie or the slides that they showed. And since then I was crazy about seeing the slides or seeing a movie. And eventually I got one of the first movie cameras that you put a film in. And we had only one film we could watch because you just couldn't buy these things. But I was in heaven when I got that. So you see?
It was worth it.
It was worth it.
How about vacations? Did the family go on vacations when you were a kid? Or?
Well, as you see, we were sent to my aunt and had great vacation. And the other time when I was little, I went to my mother's sister, the younger aunt. So we always were, as far as my father and mother. Oh, and then it seems we always went together. If we went, they took us too. And then once we went, all of us in vacation. It is called the Sauerland. And it was fun there. Everybody, I loved the white of the egg white. I didn't want the egg yolk, so everybody gave me their egg whites. You know, when there was a boiled egg. Klärchen, mach gerne das Weiße vom Ei. So they gave me the egg white, you know, and you had maybe around 20 people. You know, so that would have been too much. So a few of them gave me the egg white, and so kind of catered to me.
Wasn't there something about you fighting some boys too when you were a kid, or something?
Oh, that was later on. That was later on.
What about that?
At that time, nobody bothered me. I didn't fight any boys. There was something else that I was going to tell about that time. Oh yes, and then we went just before we were sent out of Germany. During that summer, 1938, we all went in vacation. I don't know if Papa realized that we once stayed. Who knows what's going to happen in Germany? And we all went on a vacation in Germany, traveling along the Rhine. And it was absolutely beautiful. It stayed with me all these years, when we were sent to Poland, this beautiful experience that we had while traveling and seeing the beautiful towns, because some of these towns in Germany, they're so pretty, so beautiful, which until that time I really hadn't seen that much of Germany, just around our area. And we were traveling along the Rhine, and the beautiful scenery along the Rhine. It's just, as a child, even at that time, I appreciated scenic beauty and beautiful things.
That's amazing, because a lot of kids don't. I didn't.
Oh yes, I did. I think that's why I still like to go hiking and go out in the woods, or hike mountains, or go into castles, see castles. That was what we did too at the time. Except the one bad experience we had at that time, you saw everywhere Juden unerwünscht. We couldn't go to public swimming pools because they said Juden unerwünscht, and we wouldn't go in. Even though we had to go to some hotels that said Juden unerwünscht, because you wouldn't know where to sleep. But sometimes we found places that Jewish people had, like tourist homes. So you try to find out, Jewish communities, where can we stay at night. So we stayed at a few places like that took tourists in. And we had fun in these houses too. So we went, it's called Bodensee, Konstanz am Bodensee, which is, Germany is on this side, and across the lake is Switzerland. And we were asking my father, let's go to Switzerland, let's go to Switzerland. And we had met another tourist who was with us, a young man, and he didn't have a passport, so we couldn't go to Switzerland. So since then, I didn't like this man anymore, because he held us back from visiting Switzerland. And we all wanted to go to Switzerland. But that's how my father is. If somebody else is with us who can't go, then we don't go. Because he had the passport, and he could have gone. We could have gone. So that's an experience that stayed with me during all these terrible years we had afterwards.
Good vacation.
Great, fantastic.
Any other things from being a kid you remember?
There are probably more things. Like something else happened this time. Again, my brother got hurt, and I helped him. Mama and Papa were both at that time working, visiting customers. And Mama did more and more, because a lot of my father's customers that he usually visited said, Mr. Teichmann, I'm sorry we can't see you, because the neighbors say, you're seeing this Jewish salesman, and they're giving them a hard time. So my mother went to see them. And so she was working with him from morning till evening, and we had this Jewish girl with us at the time, or also a lady who worked in the office. She was Jewish, and she stayed sometimes with us. We stayed a few hours longer, and she stayed with us. We liked her very much. And we had a big warehouse in the backyard. And somehow there was a big, big wooden box. And my brother decided he wants to carry this box on his head. And I said, well, this box is a little bit too big, but I helped him to get it on his head, a big wooden box. He wanted to walk with a big wooden box.
Gary was full of bright ideas, wasn't he?
So we got this box on his head, but then it must have leaned backwards a little bit, and all of a sudden it snapped backwards. And since he was just a tiny little guy, it hit his legs in the back, and the whole muscle here split open from it, And the funny thing is, it wasn't bleeding, but it was muscle that split open, and it had an awful look to it. No blood came out.
Wow.
So it was very sad. It scared me half to death. This time there was no blood, but I still got a shock. Anytime somebody gets hurt, it is terrible to me. So, and I don't think my parents were home yet when that happened. So I don't know what happened right afterwards, but I got very scared when that happened, when we did that. And this time I was kind of an accomplice because I helped him to get that box.
You helped him get the box on his head. Seeing as how scared you are of blood, I'm amazed because I remember the time when I was playing in the woods with my friends and I got that stump rammed into my leg in Damascus and we had to go to the doctors and the stitches.
Don't you remember I almost fainted?
I remember you weren't too comfortable, but
they had to give me smelling salt.
Somehow I don't remember
that?
that.
No, because they gave you a shot and you were involved with that. They gave me smelling salt because they could see I was getting completely white and ready to faint.
Yeah.
I see.
Now what about beating up the boys?
That was in Poland already. That were Polish boys. I don't really know what the reason was. Why I beat? They must have said something that I didn't like or appreciate, and I just went at them and just beat them, you know. And they were shocked because they've never seen a girl attack them, you know. I really attacked them, beat them up, and they really didn't.
So maybe
they were so shocked they really couldn't beat me back, you know.
That's interesting. Do you think you maybe got a little temper from your father or something?
No, because I don't have any temper at all.
But you teed off on these boys all of a sudden.
Yes. But it wasn't that much that I lost completely my temper, but that I thought they deserved it. They should somehow get it. So I decided I'm going to do it.
That's interesting. Any last items as far as being a kid that stand out in your mind?
There are probably many, but right now I can't pick something. I can't think of something. I know we had always Christmas, and that was a great time. We enjoyed that. We had always...
You were going to tell a story about being a kid in the first grade and a teacher?
Oh, yes, yes. When we went to first grade, my mother held me back not to go to first grade because at that time I had these nightmares before, and she decided to keep me home. And the other thing also was the teacher that we were supposed to have in first grade. She didn't want us to have that teacher because she knew he is an anti-Semite. So somehow they said that the first grade teacher would be the same teacher that my sister had, who was fantastic, fantastic. She was a woman, fantastic teacher. So she decided, well, she's going to keep me back, so then I would go together with Gerhard, my brother, to first grade. And also at that time I got from little chubby girl, very, very skinny, lost a lot of weight, and all of a sudden very, very skinny. So she decided to keep us back. Then, when it was time to go to school, it was still the same teacher. We didn't get the one that she thought we would have. We had this guy who was that big anti-Semite. And, well, I didn't know, but she knew it. And even though I was one of the best pupils in school, this teacher, every time he walked by the rows, you know, and I happened to be a lefty. And every time he saw me writing with my left hand, he gave me a hit on my back that I, you know,
Ouch.
was shocked, you know. And I never got spanked at home. You know, I was a good little girl, and here this guy walks along and hits me. It was a shock to me, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it's because really we are Jewish. He has it out on us. And so that was a daily routine almost, you know. And I couldn't write with my right hand, especially in first grade. Everything I did was with my left hand. And then also at one time, I don't know if it was also because I was writing with my left hand, he just he called me to the front of the room, and I had to hold my hands out. And they have those little sticks that you hear stories that teachers have, you know, and he hit me over my hands.
Ouch.
the front of the class. That was like being in torture, you know, for everybody to watch. And to Gerhard, the same thing. He had to come to the front of the class a lot of times. Or they even sent you to stand in a corner, you know, depending what they felt like at that time. So that was my experience. And then the first writing assignment, when we learned to write a little bit, he says, well, why don't you write about a dream, your dream you had that you remember? I think that's why I have the writing block. When I think dream, especially at that time, the dream that came to my mind was the
Nightmares.
The nightmares. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. But I really do have
Not a good
writing
association, let's put it that way. That's interesting.
So that's the episode about first grade. And then the second grade, we had to move from Germany. We didn't tell that story. We had a big warehouse near the railroad tracks because my father had the wholesale business, paper and spices, and the warehouse was at the railroad track. And the railroad track belonged to the state, I think, or the city. And they decided, because Opa was Jewish, he has to move. And they gave him all kinds of excuses. They want the spot for something else. He has to move. So he had to tear the warehouse down. Not that they said, leave the warehouse. He had to tear the warehouse down. And now he had to try to find another place that's suitable, so where we could live and where we also would have the big warehouse. So it took a while, and then he found a place, and we had to move to another town that was about half an hour away, Annen. And that's the place where we were sent from to Poland, from Annen. So that, at the time we didn't realize really what was going on. You know, we weren't aware of that at all, because really nobody called us openly, you dirty Jew, something like that. So we didn't really feel the kind of anti-Semitism openly that you had in Poland, or maybe in other big towns, except that people had to put the signs out afterwards, Jews not permitted, but they were forced to do it if they wanted to or not. They had to put the signs out. So that's the other little incident of my childhood.
Let's talk about getting married and what that was like. How old were you when you got married?
Oh, goodness. 17 years.
And how old was
Daddy?
Yeah.
He was 23.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first time that you saw him?
Yeah.
Details, please.
Well, it was a strange... It was really... The occasion was unhappy, but that's when I saw him the first time. We went to a memorial for the Jewish people that were killed on the march. You know, they called them Death March. And we went, it was in the woods someplace. All the Jewish people that survived were driven over there. And during the memorial service, somehow I walked away. Well, you know, everybody was there, and somehow I walked away from it. And it was along a path, and I walked down there a little bit, and all of a sudden, somebody came the other direction. And he, at that time, was wearing an American uniform. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I thought, geez, that handsome guy. I really could fall in love with him. But I didn't know if I would meet him again or not. But I met him again, and exactly that's what happened. I fell in love with him.
Where did you meet him again?
In the Jewish community. He was just another Jewish boy who was a survivor, who survived the concentration camp. But he was headed, they gave him a job for the Joint Distribution Committee, and they gave him a uniform to wear at that time. So it looked like an American. He looked like an American soldier.
How long did you know him before you got married?
A year, or 1.5 years, I think.
And what was that year like?
Well, for part of the time, we saw each other every day. I, at the time, lived at that Jewish community center because we came from someplace else. That's a story in itself to tell. And he was also living at the Jewish community center because that's where everybody got their food. They saw that everybody had something to eat who came from Norway and had nothing. The people that survived the concentration camps. And that's how I met him. And then they arranged dances sometimes. And there was a piano, and I played the piano, and he heard me play the piano, and he came and sat there all the time. Because his sister was a music major. And she had emigrated to Israel just before the war. So this was a pleasant surprise to him to have somebody play the piano. And there was also a young boy there who played the violin, so we played duets together to the whole audience, so that was fun.
What was your family's opinion of
what?
Your husband-to-be?
Mietek?
Yeah.
They loved him. Well, at that time, only my mother knew him. We didn't even know that my father was alive at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Mama liked him.
Is that right?
Yeah, but at that time, that was only the beginning. It wasn't quite that serious yet. We didn't know how it would turn out.
Is there anything special about the wedding ceremony that stands out in your mind?
Special?
Wasn't there someone that wasn't invited or something? Or?
Well, I think I would say that's maybe not that I call it special, not such a pleasant part. I think now I shouldn't have done it. I didn't invite my grandmother and my grandfather.
Why not?
Because of my grandmother's, how can I explain it? Einstellung. She was leaning towards
sympathetic?
Nazism, sympathizer, right.
Yeah.
She believed the stories they told, that they only were goodies, they weren't the bad ones, you know. And even though we told her, my God, how can you believe that? You know, we're telling you what happened to us. We were sent away. How can you be so brainwashed, you know? And I had really a grudge against her. And my grandfather was different, but I couldn't invite my grandfather and not my grandmother. So I was torn, you know. But I decided I didn't want them there at the Jewish ceremony.
Seems appropriate to me.
So then they came when we had the reception, you know, they were all there, but not during the ceremony. Right or wrong, that's what I did.
What were the best and worst things about the first year of marriage?
The best was because I was with the man that I loved.
So what was the worst?
Well, because there were all these disappointments that, you know,
What were
that
the
your
disappointments?
imagination makes up a fairy tale, and that isn't really so.
Want to give any examples?
No.
Okay.
Well, there's just one little thing, not that might have that much, but the misunderstanding, how you don't understand your partner. When I was pregnant, and at that time there wasn't that much to eat, and especially certain things, certain foods you couldn't get, like oranges. And Daddy somehow brought 4 oranges for me that his American friends had given him. And oranges always were my favorite food. And when I saw these oranges, I just went crazy. and I ate them all at once. And when your daddy found out that the oranges were gone, he just brought them to me the day before, and the next day all of them were gone, he got really upset. How could I do that? Why did I eat them all at once? Why didn't I, leave a little piece for each day and stretch it out maybe half a year or so? I said I needed to eat them all at once. I had to make up.
What would you
for
say
all
about
the
your
time.
ability to communicate with each other at this point
We
in time?
just did not know how to communicate. Maybe it was me, I don't know. I just couldn't communicate. And then he couldn't communicate either. It has to be both ways, and I just didn't know. I never learned to communicate. I loved my parents, but we never talked. We never confided. They never made me, tell them anything. Except when I had a nightmare and went to them. I don't even think I told them the nightmare, what I dreamt of. Just that I had a nightmare. I don't think I ever told them.
Yeah, I can't say I remember your parents as great communicators because they never said a word to me other than eat the soup and, lieber Ordnung, lieber Sie.
Yeah, right. This just weren't taught to communicate. And I think it took me a while too before I could communicate with you and my children, that they had the confidence that they can talk to me. Took a while, didn't it?
I don't remember saying a whole lot myself growing up, but
Well,
because obviously problems me and Gideon fighting all the time and stuff. But well, the last time we were talking, you were saying that you had gone to Poland and then you had gotten adjusted and actually started to enjoy living there with the people and with your friends.
Right, because Opa had many, many friends there that he knew from before he left. And they were so helpful to us, especially to, well, I don't know how much it was my brother and sister, but to me, they were very helpful. So I was most of the time in one of their houses. And especially one family that was the dentist there. And he had 3 daughters and 1 son. And especially one of the daughters really took me under her wing. She loved me. So I was always there. They also had a piano. And she played the piano and she sang. And somehow I continued playing there because I had lessons when I was in Germany. And I continued playing there on her piano. And somehow, I think we were kind of a novelty there because we spoke German. We were a little bit different than all the other children. So I was constantly there and even sleeping there at night. And then I had also many younger girlfriends that were my age. And they helped us out to be able for Opa to make a living, because we really came without anything.
What did he do?
They established like a club where the people would meet in the evening or late in the afternoon, and Mama would do some cooking. They could order if they wanted to have dinner at night or drinks or something. So it's like a social club for the Jewish people. And so this way Opa and Oma were there, and we were there all day too, and they could make just a little bit of a living on. And until the war broke out, the Germans came, they had that club there. And we were there all the time. And I remember at one time, the other Jewish people lived around there, and girls and boys my age, and I decided to put on a stage play. And It was really a great experience. All of a sudden, I was a great actress, and I put on. Oh, it must have been because my cousin took me to a movie, and it was a very dramatic movie, a love affair, you know. And eventually, the lover, the woman died, or he shot her, or something like that. So I tried to put that kind of a play on, you know. I was the heroine. Is that what you say? So eventually I got shot and I fell down, you know, and so on. So that was fun doing. And then all of a sudden, 1939, and the war started. We hear planes flying over, and very soon afterwards the Germans came in. Well, there probably still other stories in between to tell, but this is the important part when all of a sudden the Germans came in. And during that time, before the Germans came, I think Elsie wrote a letter to Roosevelt if we could immigrate to America, that we were sent from Germany. She told the whole story. And supposedly they gave us permission to immigrate, because she at her age had written that letter, and somehow, but it was too late. By the time things got rolling, the Germans were there already, and we couldn't go anymore. So we got through the war right there. Now, as the Germans came in, all of a sudden, the Germans were there. There wasn't really much fighting around there. They just rolled in. They were there. And then they were searching for people who spoke German, who could translate. And Opa went somehow someplace in a factory where maybe the Polish soldiers were there. I'm not quite too sure what exactly was going on. And Opa was translating. And at one time, all of a sudden, one of the Germans somehow beat him up, but I don't know exactly why, what that was all about. And then he decided, well, I'm not going to go and translate anymore. I don't want to be treated this way. So that was the beginning. Can you cut it for? Well, when the Germans came in, it wasn't anything drastic all of a sudden. There was no big fighting or no killing instantly, you know. And as I said, Papa went to translate, and let me think.
So Opa didn't want to go and do translating anymore?
No. And
so what did he do after that?
Well, we just stayed
and
home.
Laid low for a while.
Stayed low, right. But in the beginning it was just the soldiers came in, and there was nothing drastic going on. And slowly they started to make restrictions, you know, you can't walk there, and the Jews can't walk down that street.
And slowly more and more restrictions.
Slowly more and more restrictions. When a soldier walks by, they had to salute them, and things like that. And well, since Oma was German, she was trying to protect, to go and talk to the ones in charge, so that we would be a little bit, you know, left alone, protected. And some of the soldiers, they even came to us because they were so happy to find somebody that spoke German, and they were just plain ordinary people. And even though we told them, look, we are Jewish, you know, they didn't give a damn, some of them, and they just came to our house. And some of them played skat. That's a game the card game that they play in Germany. And Opa found a few people that he could play skat with. So it was not, not as dramatic in the beginning. As I say, little by little it started. Then all of a sudden, all the Jewish religious people they were supposed to cut their beards off. And since they're very religious, it's an important part to have a beard. And they didn't want to cut it off. They wore kind of band-aids around there, white band-aids. And, that looked kind of funny, and the Germans made fun of that. And Elsie, since she had gone to high school already, she was older than ours, and people wanted something done or asked for petitions to write something. Also, there was a restriction. You Jewish people couldn't travel anywhere, couldn't take a train, or were completely restricted. And then Elsie was writing petitions for them in German. So a lot of people came to us, and with OPA together, they wrote petitions for people when they needed something. And, oh goodness, at one time, somehow we had gotten a goose someplace, because it was very difficult with food. You had a hard time to get enough food to eat.
But you got hold of a goose.
Somehow we got a hold of a goose, and we kept it in the back, you call it yard. It was a back, and we tried to feed it to get it fattened up. And by the time we had it fattened up, one of the Germans came along. Somehow they walked through the yard, and they saw a goose there, and he decided to take it. And we all ran out. Oh. Papa ran out, I ran out, and we didn't want to give him. We said that's ours, and we spoke German, but it didn't help any. He just took the goose, took off, and I think he even hit Papa, at the time. And so Papa realized there really isn't that much protection. And shortly, no, I think I'm jumping the gun right now.
Well, go ahead anyway.
What I wanted to say then, after the Germans were there, a short time afterwards, Jewish people from all over Europe were sent to the Polish area, and a lot of them came to Ostrowitz too. German Jews, Austrian Jews. All of a sudden, we had a lot of other Jewish people there, not just the ones that lived, but from all over. So people had to try to find them places and arrange living quarters for them and so on. So all of a sudden, it was a different community, a much larger community with all the German and Austrian Jews. And as long as they could, they tried to keep a social life up as much as possible, because a lot of them were very intellectual. And they also sent people from other parts of Poland. And one group of people came from Lodz, which was a big city. And one of the people that was sent, she was a piano teacher. And since I had taken piano lessons before, she then afterwards also gave me piano lessons. And her son, who had already finished high school, became our tutor. So he taught us, because there weren't really any schools at the time anymore, after the Germans came in. And he taught us whatever he knew, history, and math, and so on and so on. So from that time on, all our education was tutoring or reading books wherever we could lay our hands on. And then shortly afterwards, the Jewish people had to move out certain sections of Ostrowitz. At that time, Jewish people lived all over, and then all of a sudden they had to move out, and it was only a certain area where Jewish people could live. It still wasn't a closed-up ghetto at the time, but certain areas were restricted. Jews couldn't live there. But where they moved now, there still lived the Aryans too, Polish people. So it was not the closed-up ghetto yet. So they really started little by little, to do all these restrictions. And then one night, I don't know if that was how much afterwards after they came in. One night, all of a sudden, we hear shooting all night. And the next morning, we find out that they had taken out a lot of the intelligence there, and they had shot them, taken them out on the street and shot them. And supposedly, Opa was also to be one of them, but somehow one of them mentioned, but he has a German wife or something like that, so that somehow they didn't get Opa, they didn't kill him at the time. That was really the first real drastic thing they did. Then afterwards, they took some, not Jewish people, Polish hostages. Something, I don't know what was going on, if there were some partisans did something or whatever, but they took some hostages then, and one woman was also taken. And they made a big display of hanging all these hostages. I think there were about 20 of them. A public display on the marketplace. Everybody had to come to the marketplace and look as these people were hung. 10 of them. And so this is how slowly these atrocities began in Austria. Let me get back to myself, Roni.
So what was Oma doing in the meantime?
Well, Oma was trying to keep us alive. That means supplying some kind of food. So since she was the one who could travel, Opa couldn't travel, couldn't go anywhere. She was traveling to all kinds of places, dealing, buying maybe cigarettes, getting cigarettes, then selling them someplace else, or trading them for food, or bringing things from someplace else, so that we somehow could survive. How she did it, I really don't know, because Oma really had a hard time speaking Polish. She picked up very, very few words only. But somehow she managed. And then also she was trying to, since we started hearing stories that the Germans are evacuating certain cities, since traveling wasn't free, and newspapers weren't around, and radios were taken away for a long time before. It was hard to communicate, to get information, what was really going on. And the rumors had it that they're starting to evacuate towns, and what they were saying, they were just resettling them, resettling the Jews. But somehow, some people had ideas that they did something worse than just resettling it. And some of the Jewish people who had younger children, asked Oma if she could bring them someplace, that they had found a place where they could leave a child or a son or somebody who was small. So Oma brought these children there. Now, this was naturally, she risked her life, and maybe ours too. If she would have been caught that she is taking the Jewish children and bringing them someplace, that would have been the end. I don't know how far they would have gone, if they would have gotten us too and killed us right away, or just Oma at the time. But she still did that. And at a certain time, they took Jewish people, and took them to working camps. They were not called concentration camps, but working camps, so that they had to live in the factories. And since that time, I think that's when it happened also with the goose, that they took the goose. And when Opa realized that there is really no protection at all, even for us, when we say, you know, how can you do that to us? And they didn't give a damn. He decided maybe it's safer for us if he also goes to a working camp, that would be more of a chance for us to survive. Also, we heard, there was another family who, also the mother was German, the father was Jewish, and that was a town maybe 60 kilometers away or so. And they used to come and see us once in a while. And all of a sudden we didn't see them anymore. And somehow we had heard rumors that the family was sent, deported. The whole family, not just the father, that the whole family was deported. And now when Papa heard that, he thought, oh my God, there's just no protection really. So maybe if I'm not with them,
They'll be better off.
There might be a chance. So then Opa decided he's going to stay in a working camp. And he went to a working camp. I forgot what the name was called. Denkau, I think. I don't know exactly what it was called, but it was not too far away from it. It was, as a matter, within walking distance. We walked 2 hours and we got there. So from then on, Opa was there, stayed there overnight at the camp. And then to hear Opa's story, that's a different story. You know, to hear what Opa went through from that time on, you would have to read Opa's memoirs. So a few times we went there to see him. We got a chance, I think 2 or 3 times we got a chance to go and visit him there. And he didn't tell us anything, if anything bad was going on there or not, but we were still free to go and see him there. And after a short time afterwards, they said this camp was eliminated, that all the people are sent someplace else. So from that time on, we still had, he was sent to another camp, Strachau, I think it was called. And we just, a few times, somebody brought us some written messages from Papa. And right afterwards, we didn't hear from him anymore. So from that time on, which was maybe 42, 43, we didn't hear from him anymore. We didn't know what happened to him. And we stayed on in Ostrovets. When the deportation started in Ostrovets, they said one night, they said all the Jews had to be at the marketplace the next morning, early in the morning. And that meant from the marketplace they would be transported onto trains and out of Austria. And my grandfather had died in the meantime, I think a year before, and shortly after we got there, a year or so after we got there, he died of, I don't know, they say maybe typhoid, but I'm not too sure. So my grandmother was there alone. And Oma decided we're going to lock ourselves in. There were doors, and every window had heavy shutters, big wooden shutters that you locked with a heavy iron bar from the inside. And she decided we are going to just lock all the shutters, and the doors also had the same kind of shutters that you pulled in and locked, and just not move and not make a sound, and that's it. And at the day of the evacuation, early in the morning, our grandmother, who had to go, we could not keep her there because we knew that's the end. She came to the door in the morning and said, Hertha, I have to leave. I'm leaving now. And my mother was very upset. She was crying. And grandmother went.
Was that Oppa's mother or?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We lived all in the same house. She had
Yeah.
a separate room here. We lived on this part.
Mm-hmm.
And she went. And the day, all day long, you heard shooting and screaming and shooting and screaming, and people, the Germans, Now, through our shutters, you could look through the slits
Just a
and
little
see
bit.
what's going on outside. And so we looked when the screaming was in the streets and people were led to the marketplace and so on. And at one time, that was already late in the afternoon, it quieted down. It was already quiet. All of a sudden, we hear a young boy, screaming, I didn't know. So they were searching the houses for if anybody was hiding or anything, and they found this little boy, and we knew him. He lived not far up the street. And he said, I didn't know. And I just happened to sit when I heard the screaming, go to the window and look through the spot. And one of these
You saw the kid get shot?
Yes. One of those big tall guys. He took his gun out and shot him. This was right in front of the house.
Doesn't get any more shocking than that.
And this big tall guy, we had seen him before.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I have met him. We have met him when we went swimming near the river.
The German soldier.
Yeah, and well, he was a gendarme. He was not one of the SS people. They sent special groups in. There's special SS troops,
Mm-hmm.
Also to clean up when they went in. But this was not one of them. This was a gendarme, which means a policy officer. So all of them did. Whoever felt like killing, they did. And he shot that little guy, that little boy, right in front there. This guy was very, very tall. And then afterwards, they called the Jewish troops. They always had Jewish people who had to do the cleaning. They didn't carry the dead people away. It was the Jewish cleanup room. They had their people
Did
that they
anybody
called
ever
together.
come to the door during the day as it was locked?
Yes. So they called them, and as it happened, the one who they called to clean up was a neighbor down the street to bring this little boy away. Yes, and then all of a sudden, late in the afternoon, they come to our door and bang on the door, open up, and they come in, and Elsie at the time was working for the German department, which was called the Arbeitslager. And the guy in charge of the Arbeitslager, I think Elsie was 17. The guy who was in charge of the Arbeitslager, she worked because she spoke German, and to translate it, they didn't need a typical German for that, because it wasn't that important work, but because she spoke German and could translate, she was working for him. He came with them. He was the SS that came in at the time. And they said, what are you doing here? How come you are not out of here, the marketplace? And, you know, Mama tried to explain, well, I am German, and this, so on and so on. And then the guy that worked for Elsie said, oh no, you can't send these people away. These people don't go to the marketplace. They're stay. She is working for me, and the woman is German somehow.
They went away.
Because he was with them, that was our luck.
Mm.
Otherwise, they would have just taken us at the time. So that's how that they eventually ended, and it was all of a sudden dead silence, because the whole neighborhood around us were all Jewish people. Just further up the street there lived some Christians, and much further down, but mainly this was a Jewish section. And it was dead silence, except once in a while you heard a shot. If they were searching someplace, still found somebody, you know, that was hiding out someplace, once in a while you heard a shot. Otherwise, it was dead silence that night. So from that time on, we didn't know what happened to any of the neighbors, any of the people, because we were just cut off. We didn't hear anything anymore. If anybody survived, if anybody, where they were sent, or what was going on. And a few days later, now we stayed in the house probably about 4 days. We didn't dare to go out, to show our face out, because it was a stillness in that area. As I said, except if you heard a shot.
Like a ghost town. Nobody left.
Ghost town. And then whoever was still around, let's say they had factories around there where Jewish people worked, or people that they wanted to stay around, there now was a ghetto. A typical ghetto was built up now, with high fences around. And so even with the people that were now in this ghetto, we were not in touch at all. We didn't even dare to go near there. We were completely cut off now from any Jewish contact. So we didn't know what happened to our grandmother. We didn't know what happened to other uncles or cousins who lived in other towns, or friends, or anybody.